Hello, everybody. My name is Liz Gallagher, and I'm a paralegal at Lyles Parker. Welcome to today's webinar, hosted by the Texas Association for Home Care and Hospice. Today's webinar is entitled, it's a long one, TPE Audits, ADRs, Prepayment Reviews, Post-Payment Audits and Suspensions, the Impact of Administrative Enforcement Tools on Home Health and Hospice Agencies. Today's presenters are Richard Pecor and Les Johnson. And I'll give you a little background on them before we get started. Richard Pecor is a licensed attorney in Texas with over 30 years of experience in personal injury and healthcare law. Mr. Pecor joined Lyles Parker as an associate attorney in January 2012. Mr. Pecor's practice focuses on Medicare and Medicaid administrative provider appeals and regulatory compliance plans for providers. Mr. Pecor is a certified medical compliance officer. His office is located in North Houston, Kingwood, Texas, and regularly visits clients in the Rio Grande Valley area. And Les Johnson Jr. is a partner at Lyles Parker and is the supervising attorney for the firm's Baton Rouge office. He has over 17 years of experience, and his core areas of Les's practice include handling Medicare and Medicaid appeals and Medicare and Medicaid participation and compliance, among other things. And without further ado, I guess I'll hand it over to our speakers, Richard and Les.
Thanks so much, Liz. My name is Richard Pecor. I'm very happy to be here presenting today. We appreciate Texas Association of Home Care and Hospice for allowing us to come and share this with you. We're going to talk a little bit about TPE audits, at least I am on the first one. So, Liz, if you could give us the first slide, please. Just want to kind of go over the outline structure here of what we're going to be doing. We're going to be talking about first TPE audits. I'll cover most of that. And since that's kind of lengthy, we're going to let my partner Les here jump in on the ADRs, prepayment reviews, post-payment audits, suspensions, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we can garner from all this. Of course, this outline is general information. It's for educational purposes. It's not legal advice, so we don't represent anybody by presenting this material. It's because if you have a legal situation, it all is so dependent on the different facts of what you have in your case. We do recommend that you contact a healthcare attorney if you ever get one of these notices or you have an audit or you need to make appeals. We can help you out. Next slide, please. So let's talk about TPE audits. First, I want to give you the update as of this month. Basically, with all the MACs, they've returned and resumed to doing TPE audits. CMS started that back up September 1st, 2021. The only ones that have issued any specifics that I was able to find is First Coast. And you see there, back in March, they started doing their TPE topics, and they actually listed what they're going to focus on. Now, this does not mean this is the only thing they're going to do, but right now they're doing their TPE audit focus on Medicare Part A outpatient rehab facilities. They're the codes, lab services, and Part B lab services. So it gives you pretty specific codes as to what's on their hot list. And that's something that's always good to check on. You want to go out there to each, whatever zone you're in, whoever your MAC is, you want to go out to their website because they have a lot of tools on those websites. Les, I know that you know, when you go out to these things, you'll see videos, you'll see checklists. There's a link on here for the First Coast checklist that they offer. That'll help you pull your documentation together. Have you found that to be helpful, Les?
Oh yeah, for sure. But really, every payer is slightly different here and there with little minor things. It's always best just to go straight to them, to the source, and use their checklist, use their forms, use whatever materials they've got online, because that's what they're familiar with.
And that's a great point Les brings up, that every one of these guys is a little bit different on how they tweak what they want, which is why the TPE educational portion is so important. Can we go to the next slide, please, Liz? What you're going to find here is that when you're going one-on-one with your educator, you're going to have the opportunity to ask them questions directly one-on-one. You want to take advantage of that because you're going to have up to 3 rounds as it comes along. And we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go along. But what you have is insight into their brain and their processes and their internal policies and procedures as to what do they consider important. What's that one piece of paper that's going to be like the magic ticket that they want that if you don't have, for anybody else, they wouldn't care. But these guys might. So you want to be mindful of this as you're going through the requirements and the documents that are being requested. So let's talk about TPE audits. Let's look at it from the 10,000-foot view. The Medicare administrative contractor's job includes reviewing treatment documentation to cut down on improper payments. That's the whole purpose of this. They choose which providers and documents they're going to review based on indicators. They get this from data mining. They look at billing patterns, things like improper payment rates. They look for outliers, and they pick and choose, sometimes randomly, sometimes with different aspects in mind. They don't focus on all the providers in the TPE audits that are billing a particular item or service. They're looking at specific providers and what are these providers doing on their claim filing. A round of TPE generally involves a review of 20 to 40 claims picked at random. They pick these per provider, per service and item, and then they'll provide corresponding education. In rare circumstances, CMS may approve a probe sample of more than 20 to 40 claims. So don't be married to that number. It might be something that they enlarge for various reasons. The process, as we said, is repeated up to 3 rounds. Max will discontinue the process if and when the providers become compliant. So this is an educational process. You want to take advantage of it to learn, how can I get my claims approved with the least amount of trouble? What are you looking for? You want to take advantage of it and ask them. There's always going to be certain codes that are going to come up that are going to make you scratch your head because they keep coming back rejected, and you're going like, well, what more do they want? This is your opportunity to find out. And sometimes it's just the smallest thing. It's something ridiculous. And you think that should be implied from it. But no, they want you to state it. So a lot of times it's going to come down to some small nitpicky thing in the notes that's not being included. Have you found that to be true sometimes, Les?
There's almost no limit to how frivolous they can be at times, for sure.
The providers who remain non-compliant after 3 rounds of TPE are then referred to CMS for further action. You do not want that to happen because that could turn into a full-blown audit. And as Lester can tell you, when you have full-blown audits these days, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. If it's expanded into several years, could be several million. And with the appeal process as bogged down as it is right now, that can pretty much put you out of business. So I want to take advantage of this and start addressing these problems on the front end before you ever get audited. Next slide, please, Liz. So what's the process? Max sends a notification letter to your providers that are being targeted for review that outlines the target probe education process, tells you how it works. It explains the process by which providers will be able to receive one-on-one education and the types of education that's available. And it notifies providers that Max shall have an option to refer providers to a rack or U-pick as a result of non-responses to ADRs. Don't ever ignore an ADR. That's a bad thing. And nothing good comes of it. You're just going to get deeper into the quicksand. ADR letters sent as claims are identified for review. ADR letters sent are sent out until the identified number of claims that they want sampled have been sent in and pulled. The initial TPE round of sampling is based on claim submission date, but subsequent rounds are based on dates of service. They're going to select a range and go from there. The notification letter needs to include the following languages. And first, they're going to tell you about 42 CFR 424-535 that allows them to revoke Medicare billing privileges under certain conditions. Then they love to cite to Section 8A2 or double I, if you prefer, which basically says that if you have a pattern or practice of submitting bad claims, they can revoke your billing privileges and boot you out. Next slide, please. So the bottom line to that is that you need to be aware that there are serious consequences to ignoring this, to not complying with it, or not taking it seriously. Provider action, what's going to happen next? The provider is going to gather and submit the records like they would for any other audit. You have a duty to cooperate and comply. The requested documentation is going to vary depending on the provider type and issue. Some MACs give you checklists, some questions and answers. Sometimes there's other web tools available like web videos that we referred to. Palmetto has one out there that I provided a link to that just gives you kind of a video of how it all works. You should take advantage of that, and they're going to be out there on each of the MAC's different websites. You need to make sure and review your documentation, make sure it matches what's being asked for. I know that seems like an obvious thing, but you would be amazed how many times Wes and I run into something like that. You want to submit it by the due date listed on the ADR letter, and frequently that date is going to say it needs to be received by. So you need to incorporate your transit time in there and make sure it arrives before the due date. Failure to respond to a request for documentation is going to result in a referral to a RAC or a ZPIC or UPIC in this case. And like we said, that opens the door for a full-blown audit, and that anytime it can be avoided should be avoided. So let's stick with the probes. You're going to find that will go a lot easier for you. Next slide, please, Liz. So what is a MAC medical review? The MAC is going to identify errors in the claims, and a lot of these can be easily resolved during the conversation you guys are going to have, because the one-on-one education can be done a number of different ways. We're going to cover those. You're going to find that easily curable errors are going to include things, but not limited to things like missing documentation that can be resolved through submission of other documents after you find them. In other words, you're going to be able to supplement what you've sent in. And missing signatures. Oh my gosh, Les, how many times have you had missing doctor signatures?
They cost agencies a whole lot of money every year.
Yeah, but you'd be amazed how often it happens. It doesn't get followed through. It falls through the cracks. It's staggering that this still occurs as frequently as it does. MACs generally finish reviews in 30 days for prepayment reviews and 60 days for post-payment reviews. That's a general guideline. I wouldn't hold that to ironclad because you'll see this stretch out sometimes. But the reviews could be conducted by registered nurses with experience, coders, physical therapists, or other appropriate licensed personnel that are familiar with that field that's being reviewed. Next slide, please, Liz. So how does it work? If you're picked for the program, you're going to get a letter from your MAC. The MAC's going to review. They're going to pick out 20 to 40 claims and ask for the supporting medical records. You want to be very careful that you make sure you include everything that's been requested, all the files, all the claims. You tell them you can't find it. That's not a good thing. So you need to look for it. I am amazed how many times I get clients that frankly are just lazy about it. And they say, well, we found what we had. No. Go back and find everything that they have asked for that period. This is not a joke. You need to take it seriously. If you're compliant, you're not going to get reviewed again for at least a year on the selected topic. You might get audited on something else, but you know, for that one, you're okay for that cycle. Remember, you're looking at 3 rounds of this. If you're not compliant, then some claims will be denied. You'll get an opportunity for a one-on-one education session. You do want to take advantage of that. It's your chance to ask them directly, what's wrong with this? And if they're not looking at the specific claims in the review, they're going to be looking at claims very similar to that, so that you're going to be able to ask them, okay, what am I missing here? What's wrong? Why doesn't it meet medical necessity? And you'll get a chance to correct those on everything going forward, which is the entire point of this program. You'll be given at least 45 days to make changes and improvements. Then we're going to go through and submit them again. Next slide, please. So you're looking at a maximum of 3 rounds. The MAC's going to provide a minimum of 45 days after each post-probe educational section, and then they're going to pick, 20 to 40 new claims for review. They're going to allow time for you to cure identified errors, and hopefully you won't be making new ones or a lot of new ones. The MAC selections are based on improvement after education, and the MAC is going to conduct a maximum of 3 rounds of TPE. If the provider continues to have a high error rate after 3 rounds of TPE, well, there's something wrong. The MAC's going to refer you to CMS for further action. If you're not improving or making adjustments at the end of this, either somebody's not paying attention or whoever's in charge of improving this process and tracking the changes and making sure the training is implemented to get this downline to the people who are doing the coding is not being effective. And somebody should be writing herd on this in the first place. You should have a compliance officer or someone that has been assigned from your compliance program that is in charge of all this. And if you're not, you need to assign someone. Remember the top 6 denial reasons. Number 1 is missing face-to-face documentation. Well, they reduced the requirement to do additional commentary on a bunch of this stuff. The face-to-face documentation, there's really no excuse for it. For a complete list of home health face-to-face documentation requirements, I've got the link listed right down there. That's the latest guidance that came out. So you want to make sure you get that done. I know folks get lazy about it. Even doctors get lazy about it, but it has to happen. And if you don't, the claim's going to be kicked back automatically. That's something that's easy to fix. You just have to do it. Missing certifications or recertifications, unsigned physician orders from the certifying physician, that just, there's no real excuse for somebody not following through for that. But it happens. And if you are missing some documentation like that, you're not going to be able to avoid the fact that it was missing at the time it should have been signed. But, and Les will confirm this for you, is that the way you make a correction is you make a copy of the original. You never alter an original document. Never. That's fraud. You want to make a copy of it. You want to make the required change on the copy, sign and date the thing as far as when the change was made. And now you've got a corrected for the record document, but you still have the original. So, you've fixed it, but whatever the violation is for that particular document for not having it compliant at the right time will still be in effect, but you've reduced the problem. Encounter notes that don't support all elements of eligibility, documentation that doesn't meet medical necessity. Of course, that's such a broad canon there. What is medical necessity? Basically, it's saying that you don't have enough written down there. You see this a lot with cloning. And for folks who are not familiar with the cloning thing, it's not just the fact that you're cutting and pasting. It's the fact that you're cutting and pasting and that record is identical to another record for that patient or for other patients, maybe multiple patients. That's where you really get in problems. You want to make sure if you're going to cut and paste something from another record, carry it forward. Now, understand for you have patients where their condition doesn't change, you have to enter current information on what the patient's condition is now, how it's changed or how it has not changed, what their current readings are, what's their prognosis now, have they made any other statements on their condition or how they've improved or how they haven't improved, any new medications that were tried and were effective or not effective, how was that measured? You have to have something in addition to whatever you've copied over, or you've just committed fraud, because that's what CMS considers cloned notes. They consider it a form of fraud. So you really need to be careful about doing that. The other problem we run into all the time is records are not submitted for the claims at issue. People just ignore the request. They don't submit records, or they say we can't find it, so it doesn't matter. Well, you know, they can just ask for another one. No, you need to find the records for the patients they've requested. So I know it seems like obvious stuff, but you'd be surprised how often this happens. Unless you have anything to add to that.
Not really. I mean, it's you know, with electronic records, sometimes it's different with how corrections will occur. You've got to make sure that whatever you do in the record is always crystal clear as to what originally happened and what the new information is, and that it's been added late or after the initial documentation.
Yeah, one of the things I see in programs like EagleSoft is it never erases the previous note. It draws a line through it, and then it adds the changes. So you can still see and read the original note. Some software programs work similar to that, but the whole point is you're not eliminating official records from the patient record. That's a bad thing to do. Next slide, please, Liz. So post-probe education is going to go like this. MAC may educate moderate or major errors for education. It's going to be one-on-one education. This is your opportunity to get claim specific and interactive with your MAC representative. You can ask them pointed and specific questions about that claim. You can ask them, how do I make this claim compliant? What are you looking for? What am I missing here? Why is what I've given you insufficient? They will explain it to you. I've dealt with MACs a couple of times on these, and they're generally pretty cooperative. So if you ask them a straight pointed question, they're going to give you a straight pointed answer. They'll help you identify which claims you're having problems with or you've seen similar errors occur. They're going to give you the laws, regs, and CMS policies that are applicable to it. Do not decline education. You're passing up opportunities to fix this. And plus, when you look at it, CMS is not only tracking the results of the education as far as how many times it took, how much stuff did you go over, and how long it took you to improve. They're also going to track if you decline it. And that's going to make you a target in the future if they go back and look at this. Well, in the TPE audit, they had 3 opportunities to get education, start improving this, and they turned them all down. Guess what? We're going to refer this over to higher ups and see if they want to launch a full-scale audit. You want to bring the whole gang. Anybody and everybody that you've got in your organization that is involved with your billing and coding that you want to have at that meeting, listen and ask questions, you can bring them. Have a party, bring lunch and bring in everybody that's got a question or that or has had problems. If you got new folks, bring them too. Next slide, please. Final results letter comes in. They'll send a letter detailing the results of the claims reviewed, and they're going to include the provider's specific claim errors in it. They're going to tell you exactly what's wrong with each one. They're going to calculate the error rate at the conclusion of each round and determine whether additional round is needed or whether you pass. Normal appeal process and deadlines apply. So redetermination deadlines, 120 days. Reconsideration, 180 days. To delay recoupment, you can file your appeal sooner. For redetermination, it's within the first 30 days. And for redetermination, first 30 days. And reconsideration, it's within the first 60 days. You want to take advantage of that because that stops recoupment. Next slide, please. MAC's going to refer providers for potential escalation to CMS at their discretion after 3 rounds. That's if you do not meet standards and you don't comply. You haven't shown enough improvement. Your error rate's still too high. Referrals will include details regarding the reason you were selected, the results, any education that was provided. Remember what I said about if you refuse education, that's where that consideration is going to come in, and anything else they think is relative. If you've had a history or a pattern of doing this before, you've got problems. The MAC will refer suspected fraudulent providers to the UPIC at any time. Next slide, please. And removal from TPE comes after any round where you demonstrate a low error rate or sufficient improvement in error rates. They'll use the data analysis to monitor providers who've been discontinued, and it continues for a year after removal from TPE. Your error rate is dollars denied divided by dollars that would have been reimbursed if the claim was paid. Appeal results are not taken into account, but CMS appeals are taken into account in future TPE rounds. The MAC's overturned denials will not be taken into account in calculating future TPE error rates. And for instance, Novitas says other criteria may help determine if a provider should be removed from TPE, including results of other past reviews and provider receptiveness to education. So it all matters. Error rates for removal can be calculated on dollars denied or claims denied. Both must be below the max error rate threshold. Novitas, minor is less than 10%, moderate is 11 to 14, and major is 15% or higher. Palmetto's 20%, CGS 25%. They're all a little bit different. Next slide, please. So compliance tips, find your MAC's TPE webpage. Like I said, review the topics, dates, look for documentation checklists, videos for education on how to process your claims better. Those tools are out there. Take advantage of them. Make sure your point of contact is correct and up to date in PACOS. Conduct an internal review of records before you submit them. Check for additional documentation. Respond within the notices timeline. Track your ADRs via a spreadsheet to avoid missing a due date. Identify your point of contact for subsequent education. Calculate your error rate. As we said, don't refuse education. Identify what changes to your policies, procedures, and documentation is needed and disseminate the results of education. Call to everybody affected, relevant people in your organization. You want to disseminate that information. And I think that gets us to the next slide and to Les's section. I think I went about 5 minutes longer than I wanted to, Les. I'm sorry.
Thank you. No big deal. All right, so I'm going to talk about ADRs and prepayment reviews, postpayment reviews, and suspensions. ADRs, basically, we're just talking about additional documentation requests or additional development requests. With the TPE audits, you've already kind of been targeted as a problem provider or someone who might have issues. So it's a little riskier and there's more focus on you than ADRs are. There'll be more, I guess, just routine kind of limited scope kind of audits that'll start from just a regular ADR process. But you know, essentially, this is just the MAC exercising its auditing authority, which is important enough that they've written it into the law twice, as you can see here, Section 1883E and 1815A, which essentially say the same thing, but it just kind of details their authority to request any and all documentation that may be needed to determine the amount that should be paid. You can go to the next slide. So ADRs. So what's going to happen is you're going to get a letter sent to your main mailing address in Pecos, and usually it's going to give you 30 days to respond and submit the additional documentation. And they'll have a whole long list, kind of usually a canned list of items that they need. Make sure that you look at each one of those little items listed, and if, if your documentation includes it, you include that in what you respond with. But they typically say that if you haven't received documentation after day 30, it won't be processed by day 45, and if you had failed to respond by day 45, then the claim is automatically denied. This is basically just a little timing thing that they deal with. So when you're going to gather your documentation, lots of times the requests will just involve a handful of dates of service, or maybe sometimes one date of service for each particular patient. Make sure that if you've got, like, say, admission documents that are required for payment, that you include those as well. Anything that helps establish medical necessity or eligibility, include that with the documentation from the particular dates of service that are needed, that are requested. Track them all in spreadsheets, obviously, so you get your due dates right. With ADRs, lots of times you'll get lots of separate little individual ADRs. And so you may have 10 or 12 or more outstanding at any given time. And it can be really difficult to kind of track individual claim audits, as opposed to, say, a sample audit or something that's larger, and you kind of know, you can kind of keep them kind of together in your head, I guess. But the individual denials and audits are really difficult to track. So you definitely must have spreadsheets to keep track of all this. So also, if you have, if sometimes these things can be kind of a burden on you. And so if you got a small census, just call the MAC and discuss with them, the problems it's, causing on your operations, and they may be able to allow you to have an altered audit, I guess, smaller scope. Whatever you do, don't change your billing patterns. Don't stop all claims. That's just a red flag for them to continue to use other enforcement mechanisms on you. But always read the letters carefully. Make sure you're submitting every single thing that they request. And this is really, really important, this last point. We'll put the ADR number on there. It's like, that's how they track it. But base number each page, which just means basically you get into a PDF editing software, and there'll be a place, something called base numbering, or at least page numbering. What you want to do is put a page number on every single page. That way, if you gave them 566 pages and they claim that a particular certification isn't in there, you can tell them exactly what page number it's on. So let's go to the next slide, I guess. This is what to do. Okay, so keep submitting claims. Send each ADR package separately. So if they request send you multiple ADRs, don't send in one big folder, because they'll just get it all confused. Keep everything the way they submitted it, or the way they requested it. So if they requested 30 records for 30 claims in one letter, keep those records together. If you get a different letter requesting 5 other claims, keep those 5 records together. Include the initial cover letter and fact sheets if they've got that. Most of them now set up electronic submission of medical documentation system, so you can use that. That's actually what I prefer people use nowadays. Keep a copy of everything, an inventory of it, and call the MAC. Don't be afraid to just pick up the phone and call them. If you have issues with timing of gathering documentation, maybe there's a problem with your record system at the moment and you can't comply, you can get additional days sometimes. Any number of issues you have, just call the MAC. That's who you're dealing with. So let's go to the next slide. Let's see, this is what not to do. I think Richard touched on some of these earlier, but missing face-to-face documentation or any of the required documents. Don't missing or incomplete initial certifications or research, missing physician signatures or other people's signatures as well, notes that aren't supporting all the elements of eligibility, documentation doesn't meet medical necessity, and records not submitted. Now, the records not submitted thing, that's Richard, I know, harped on the importance of that. I've got a little story to tell. My most recent case that I had was it started because the client didn't respond to an ADR. And what happened after that was a big, massive extrapolation audit by ZPIC or UPIC. And it covered such a large, I guess, scope of claims and enough years of claims that the overpayment amount, even though I think they were only maybe an 80% denial rate, usually we see up to 100, in really bad audits, but this one was maybe 70. But it was like a company completely. They're done. But it all started really just with them failing to respond to an ADR. So next slide. All right, so prepayment reviews. These can be sometimes much worse. So ADRs are kind of routine, ongoing, sometimes only involve a single claim or a single kind of service. Prepayment reviews, these are targeted, and they've picked you out as a problem provider who has high error rates or fraud concerns or other issues, and they've placed you on prepayment review. This can go on for a really long time, up to say a year. The ADRs, like I said earlier, these are kind of more routine by a MAC. Your prepayment reviews are usually going to be by a ZPIC or UPIC or another contractor. They're incredibly disruptive to your cash flow and can easily bankrupt an agency alone. Even if all your claims are compliant, if you're not managing your cash flow and you get placed on 100% prepayment review, it can kill the agency just by itself. Let's see. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so how this will start, like other situations, it's going to start with a note, with a letter telling them that you're being selected for prepayment review. It says that they have to, in Chapter 3 of the Program Integrity Manual, says that they have to notify the provider prior to initiation of any provider-specific prepayment review. Private payers are increasingly starting to use prepayment reviews in their claims. Way back in the day, in private payers, it was really just individual disputes and individual claims that you would see them kind of auditing. Now they're doing all of the same things that Medicare and Medicaid does. So you can expect to receive, maybe subject to completely different appeal rules and different coverage rules, but you can expect to receive very similar kinds of audits from all payers. They may have a different name, different acronym applied to the audit, but essentially it's the same thing. And we're seeing a lot of the same tactics used by private payers now. So, but the problem with private, obviously, is they usually don't provide as much detail when it comes to what limits there may be on there. So you need to look at your payer contracts if you get placed on prepayment review and see if it does have anything in there. Maybe even negotiate something in there one day if you're coming up for renewal. But what you really want to do is just avoid prepayment review like the plague. It takes a lot of work to get off of it, and it can last 6 months or longer. Let's go to the next slide. So if you are on prepayment review, you just know that you're just going to have to work a bunch on these claims. You're not going to be able to just mail in some things and hope that's adequate. You need to be talking to the payer, to the auditor, and you need to be explaining your documentation and making sure that you're really putting forth a good, strong effort on justifying your claims. Review all of your documentation before you send it in. Make sure that it tells the story. Why is this patient homebound? Why is this patient terminally ill? Why are they expected to die within 6 months of your hospice? Is there definitely make sure there's evidence that the services were actually provided. Make sure if you've got an LCD or NCD that covers the services, make sure you met each and every one of those requirements, and be prepared to explain it to them if you need to. If it's properly if it's medically necessary and you believe that, then you should be able to support it with your documentation and be prepared to argue it. But you're going to have to go over and make sure that all the claims are, appropriately documented, coded, billed, and ultimately paid properly. Let's go to the next slide. Post-payment audits. So prepayments stop your cash flow and force you to deal with issues before you can get paid. Post-payment audits are even worse because you think that you're doing everything right and everything is fine, and multiple years go by with your claims being paid. Before you know it, there's an audit looking back at all those claims that you've been paid, say maybe 4 or 5 years earlier, and now they've got problems with each one of them and want your money back or their money back. So all this is after you've submitted the claim and received payment, so it involves recoupment as opposed to you just not being paid up front. You'll receive a letter from an auditor, lots of times it's a UPIC, requesting records for a sample of claims. Sometimes these are not a sample, sometimes it's just a list of claims. When it's a sample, usually that means that they're possibly going to extrapolate the results of the review of the sample, and that can be catastrophically expensive. But usually they'll pull some random sample for, say, the last 6 months, the last year, last 2 years, or if you're unlucky, last 3 or 4 years. And, maybe it may only be certain claims with outlier payments. They may have, there's any number of different types of claims they may decide to audit, but they've typically targeted you. They have some reason for looking at you. You can go to the next slide. Because they don't come upon these audits just randomly. They used to, I think, but now it's much more productive for them to use predictive modeling, data mining to find out where the good providers to audit are. They look at they're comparing you to every one of your other providers, and they can learn a lot through all that. But other sources of information for these audits is done from complaints. If you've got error rates in the past, high error rates in the past, or overpayment problems in the past, they'll just keep coming after you. Other auditors that are paying, that are looking at you, OIG or private payers, they can refer cases. Government agencies, reports, and state licensing boards as well. Let's go to the next slide. So primary concerns are, well, you've already been paid, and you've used that money to pay your employees and provide the care that you rendered, and now they want it all back. That's really the main problem with it. It's all looking backwards, and it can at times be unfair in that regard. But just because someone's not taking money from you now or not denying claims now doesn't mean that you don't have risks out there, and that you're not doing. It doesn't mean that you're doing everything right. So compliance should always be, something that you look into at all times. And because every time, if you've got a problem doctor who's not signing their notes or, not putting any detail in their face-to-face documentation, or they're not providing any individual kind of information in any of their certificates of terminal illness, then they're putting your agency at risk for paybacks. And so letting that go on longer and longer a period of time doesn't help you any, really, especially if they come back and audit you. So try to address those things up front and make sure you address any compliance problems up front and quickly, so they don't turn into giant risk areas later. So again, they can be very costly. They can result in extrapolated damages. They have CPICs, they are routinely finding really, really, really unnecessarily high error rates when they review your records, because they're just really nitpicky with everything. But lots of times you'll have, maybe there'll be a medical necessity kind of denial that they'll issue, and that'll be their main reason. They don't think the patient was appropriate for your provider type or your level of care, and that'll be the main denial. But then they'll throw in 2 or 3 little technical things that are problematic. And so just because you can win the argument on medical necessity, and maybe the patient really was terminal, or maybe the patient was appropriate for home care, but if you don't have one of the technical requirements, you're going to lose that appeal anyway. And so you don't get paid a dime because you didn't have a signed cert before you submitted a bill. a claim. So, make sure that you address these issues as you go and routinely, just as an ongoing basis. Next slide. So, appeals process for really any of these, for the ADRs, this is Medicare. You have these 5 levels of appeal, and they would apply more or less the same for any individual denials and what we call big box cases that involve samples and extrapolated overpayments. You have the redetermination level, which is with your MAC. You have the reconsideration level with a qualified independent contractor. A few years later, you'll have an ALJ level hearing, and then if you're successful there, you might be unlucky and have your opponents appeal that to the Medicare Appeals Council level, and then there's district court after that. You do not want to have to go to district court. It's the standard of review is heavily slanted in your opponent's side. So really, you want to make sure that you don't end up with denials, or that you take care of them as early as possible in the appeals process, because this is a multi-year, very expensive, very, very slow process. I would imagine if you had an overpayment letter today and you had to go all the way to the ALJ level, it's probably going to be 4 or 5 years before that hearing will take place. So go to the next slide. So appeal statistics. So this is full administrative appeals and then individual claims, all updated through 2021. And the thing really that jumps out, obviously, is what we've highlighted, is the difference between, say, 2012 and 2021. We used to win a ton more appeals earlier in the process, and now they've just kind of, I don't know, I say that they've got the judges drinking the Kool-Aid, but they've just eventually whittled away a lot of the defenses and arguments we used to be able to be successful with, and now it's a little bit more straightforward, and I guess more, what do you got in your documentation? So do you got the requirement elements or not, period. And lots of times what causes overpayment appeals to become expensive, it isn't, I mean, you may have problems with medical necessity on every one of your patients, but hopefully that's not your problem. Hopefully it's just a problem with your forms. Just the timing of when you were doing things. But those are those are good enough reasons to deny a claim. But at least make sure that you're treating the patients well and all that. I find that helps tremendously in dealing with the payers. Comply definitely on the technical stuff, but make sure you're definitely treating the patients well. Don't harm them in any way. So let's just move on. Oh, dismissals. You'll see a lot of the dismissals have dramatically increased as success rates have dropped, and the delays have just basically put providers out of business. I got 2 decisions this week on appeals that were like 6 or 7 years old, filed by one of my clients by another law firm. Their lawyer passed away, and so they had to change lawyers. But so they'd done up all the work on these appeals, and they get basically to the ALJ level, but the businesses are completely out of business, and they're gone. They don't do a single thing. They file no claims. There's no business whatsoever left. So all of this is important, because it can crush an agency unnecessarily. You may have good patients and good referrals and good care that you're providing, but if you're not doing the little things, it's all for nothing. So let's go to the next slide. Suspensions. So if you haven't listened to anything we've said before, and you've not responded to ADRs, and you haven't taken any of the audits seriously, you may find yourself one day on payment suspension. This is basically just kind of kills you, essentially. I'm not sure how many businesses can stay in business with no Medicare or Medicaid for up to, say, 6 months, but that's what suspension can do for you. So they've had this in a couple of situations, power to suspend for credible allegations of fraud, or if there's an overpayment that they don't know the amount yet, but they know that it's been made, they'll suspend just to, mainly for that reason, usually to just calculate the amount the overpayment amount. So that may be more temporary. But failing to respond to requests for medical records also gets your payment suspended. But it's really the credible allegations of fraud that'll come from, say, a UPIC based on their review, and if they're, say, denying all the first 15 claims they look at, and they think it's there's evidence of fraud going on, and they'll put in motion a payment suspension, and then you're more or less doomed. Go to the next slide. We have had clients get out of payment suspensions, and it takes a lot of work, and they're suspicious of every one of your claims as you go through it. So it's basically trying to convince them that you're not crooks, when that's exactly what they're thinking of you at this point. Where do they get these credible allegations? Go to the next slide. Where do they get the credible allegations of fraud? These come from hotline complaints, data mining, provider audits, or law enforcement. How do they know? So you'll usually be notified unless there's about to be an indictment and everyone is about to get arrested and people are going to be raiding offices. They'll usually inform you of their notice of their intent to suspend payments. Unless it's failure to furnish requested information, they fear that it'll tip you off and they won't be able to get money, or there's fraud. So there's usually a U.S. attorney or someone involved at that point on the side. So go to the next slide. So if prior notice is required, then they'll give you notice and an opportunity for rebuttal. This is basically where you just say, no, it wasn't us. That's not, well, we just lost your letter. We fully intended to, cooperate with your audit, and we'll give you the records within 15 days. That's probably what the kind of rebuttal you're going to be dealing with here. If it's fraud, I doubt you're going to change anyone's mind. But if you just didn't respond to a records request, it's possible that you could use rebuttal to get yourself lifted off the suspension. I can't imagine if it's credible allegations of fraud or the other. Well, actually, you can get off of that. If you can prove your claims, you can get a credible allegation of fraud suspension lifted. The real fraud one's probably not, because at that point, there's probably a U.S. attorney who's determined there to be fraud, and they're going to take over, I would imagine. But for the credible allegations, those may come from a ZPIC, and it just may be, they think you're not collecting the right documentation. But this is a very, very, very serious process that is basically your Medicare, Medicaid billing survival is on the line. Anyway, so you have 15 days to provide a rebuttal. If prior notice is not required, which in the case of fraud or those situations that we mentioned in the previous slide, they still give you an opportunity for rebuttal, but it's after the suspension's already in play. But again, you don't want to be suspended, really. So be responsive to your auditors. Take all the audits seriously and try to submit, complete documentation. And I think that's pretty much it. Now we're to the conclusion slide. You can go to the next one, I guess. So here we are. So results of a bad audit: you can get more audits. You can cripple your agency. You can have more payment audits. You can, go out of business, have your Medicare billing privileges revoked, payment suspended, any number of other things. But basically, it's all on you to stop this from happening. You don't want to try to fix the problem once it's there. And that's really, I think, what the takeaway is be responsive to the auditors, file complete responses, and take all of this seriously as an ongoing concern. Richard, did you have
Les, I agree. I did. I wanted to emphasize what you just ended with, which is the fact that for years we've been telling folks this whole thing has been trending toward you have to start fixing the problem before you ever get the audit letter. If you get your compliance plan in place, you need to utilize it. You need to do your sample audits. You need to keep everybody up to date with your training. You need to make sure that your documentation is being complete, because everybody gets lazy. You have doctors that are busy as hell, and you're trying to get them to write more detail in the notes is a hard thing to do. I get it. But the problem is, if you don't do that, now you have fewer and fewer opportunities down the line to try to fix this without putting your agency in a potentially crippling position and maybe go out of business. So you've got to take this stuff seriously.
So we have one question. Are you guys ready to take questions?
Sure.
Okay, one question. Is it likely for an agency to get selected if the agency has a high affirmation rate with RCD? That's the question.
What do you think, Les?
Sorry, I was muted. Hi. Well, I don't know. Maybe. Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
no
we don't
magic.
know all the parameters that they selected on, so.
Yeah. There's really, it can be anything that they don't like. And it changes every single year. The OIG issues, like a risk report or whatever, essentially what is a risk report each year, and lots of times payers will kind of look at that and they'll start to audit along those lines. But they've got their own prerogatives and priorities that they have. And yeah, anything that is non-compliant and you have reason to believe that you think that they don't like it, then that could very well be a reason for one of the audits, for sure.
When you do your annual risk analysis, you're going to see areas that you're having flow problems with or documentation problems with, and you should be doing that risk analysis every year. You want to focus on these areas beforehand. If you know you've got an area that is a problem, can be improved, you got to deal with it. It's that simple.
But it doesn't matter if it's a demonstration program or it's, I don't know if anyone knows the full bounds of what they will or will not consider when choosing someone. Ultimately, risk to the program and the Medicare trust funds is what's really driving everything. So whether it's something really, really specific like some demonstration program or anything else, it's possible that could be a reason for selecting you. Yes. So compliance across the board really is what they want.
Les, I appreciate you joining me today. I think that's about all we've got, Liz. Do you have any other questions?
Let me see. We might have one more question. One more latecomer question. All right. It's a long one. I received some ADRs and I submitted information, but received another letter with, in quotes, granular error denial. It appears that I need to submit via fax. Is that correct? Correct. That might be
I don't know.
Call-in question. But.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what you're explaining the situation was, but I'd hesitate to answer, honestly. But call one of us.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. I would suggest, though, if you haven't retained healthcare counsel, you need to find a healthcare lawyer, and that doesn't mean your brother-in-law's cousin who went to law school and is a divorce lawyer. You need somebody who knows healthcare law, because this stuff is peculiar, it's specific, and they're going to know what you're talking about.
I'm guessing what you're saying with granular denial detail, like maybe you're just saying they're not very specific. That's just common, if that's what you're talking about. Frequently, we're having to try to decipher and guess what their real issue is. But yeah, I don't think
that would be a perfect. I think that would be the perfect opportunity to call the MAC.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I think that might wrap it up for today's webinar. Yeah, thank you all for joining us, and everyone will get copies of the slides. People often ask that question. We do share the slide copies with everyone and via email. So if you do have any additional questions, you can always contact our firm, Lyles Parker, at the number or email in the last slide there. So thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.